A spark in the courtroom. The city of Newbridge had a justice system that prided itself on tradition while quietly perpetuating systemic inequities. It was in this uneasy landscape that Judge Evelyn Harper began her day, stepping into the imposing courthouse at 7:30 a.m. sharp. At 64, she carried herself with an authority that needed no embellishment, her salt-and-pepper hair styled in a no-nonsense bob, and eyes that seemed to miss nothing, not even the subtle dismissive gestures people thought they could conceal. The courthouse itself stood as a monument to both aspiration and hypocrisy, its Greek Rivorian columns reaching skyward while housing decades of judicial decisions that often contradicted their noble intentions. Evelyn knew these halls intimately, having navigated them first as a public defender fighting for clients who were too often guilty only of being poor and non-white, then as a prosecutor determined to expose the rot within the system, and now as the first black woman to ascend to the highest bench in Newbridge County. Some still couldn't reconcile themselves to this reality, their discomfort manifesting in microaggressions that Evelyn had learned to deflect like water off glass. Yet today, as she passed through security, something felt different, a tension in the air that went beyond the usual morning rush. The guards' nods seemed more forced, their smiles less genuine. Even the marble floors seemed to echo differently beneath her sensible heels. Her instincts, honed over 35 years in the legal system, prickled with warning. The docket appeared routine: petty theft, vandalism, minor drug possession. But experience had taught her that storms often arrived disguised as calm weather. As she approached her courtroom, Deputy Chief Malcolm Grayson loitered near the door, his presence unusual for a standard Thursday morning. Known throughout the department as Stoneface for his perpetually neutral expression, Grayson's reputation for bending rules without quite breaking them had earned him both promotions and whispered complaints. His family name carried weight in Newbridge law enforcement circles, 3 generations of police leadership whose legacy walked the thin blue line between protection and oppression. Grayson's record read like a carefully curated portfolio of justifications: excessive force complaints that mysteriously lacked evidence, body cam footage that conveniently malfunctioned during controversial arrests, and disciplinary hearings that evaporated like morning mist. He represented everything Evelyn had spent her career battling against: the institutional arrogance that believed power existed to be wielded, not questioned. Today, however, he wasn't standing guard over some high-profile case or organizing a tactical response. He was waiting in her courtroom, arms crossed, jaw set, radiating the kind of entitlement that came from never having faced real consequences. Evelyn's arrival barely registered with him. She noted how his eyes flicked past her as if searching for someone more important, more worthy of acknowledgement. This dismissal, this casual assumption that she couldn't possibly be the authority figure he needed to respect, would prove to be his first miscalculation of what would become a very costly morning. The atmosphere in the courtroom crackled with unspoken tension as Evelyn moved toward her chambers, Grayson's dismissive attitude already fueling her resolve. Papers shuffled nervously in the clerk's hands, and the few early arrivals exchanged meaningful glances. As Evelyn reviewed the morning's files, she heard Grayson's voice cut through the quiet space like a blade. "Where's the damn judge?" he demanded, his tone carrying that particular edge of entitlement that came so naturally to men like him. "I don't have time to waste on this nonsense." Evelyn straightened, her movement deliberate and measured. She stepped out from behind the clerk's desk where she had been reviewing documents, her presence commanding attention despite her lack of judicial robes. Grayson turned, his eyes narrowing as he took in her professional attire, clearly struggling to reconcile this poised woman with his expectations of courtroom authority. "You looking for me, Deputy Chief?" she asked, her voice carrying the weight of years spent demanding respect in spaces that preferred to deny it. His smirk spoke volumes about his assumptions, his gaze sweeping dismissively over her appearance. "Yeah, I'm here about the vandalism case," he said, his tone implying that a mere civilian couldn't possibly understand the urgency of police matters. "We need to get this show on the road." Evelyn's eyes narrowed slightly, recognizing the calculated disrespect for what it was. Another attempt to diminish her authority before she could establish it. The moment crystallized when Grayson, frustrated by what he perceived as bureaucratic delay, made his fatal mistake. As Evelyn calmly explained the proper protocol for presenting evidence, his hand shot out in what he likely intended as an aggressive gesture of emphasis. But instead of stopping short, his palm connected sharply with her cheek in a resounding slap that seemed to freeze time itself. The sound echoed through the chamber like a gunshot, followed by a collective gasp that rippled through the small gathering of court personnel and observers. Evelyn didn't flinch, didn't reach for her face. Instead, she slowly turned her head back to face Grayson, her expression unreadable but her eyes blazing with a fire that promised retribution. In that suspended moment, realization dawned across Grayson's features, but it wasn't remorse. It was panic. Too late, he understood that he hadn't struck some inconsequential court administrator. He had assaulted Judge Evelyn Harper, and in doing so, had ignited a chain reaction that would dismantle far more than his own career. The silence in the courtroom stretched taut, like a wire ready to snap, as Evelyn processed the physical sting of the slap, her mind racing through the implications faster than Grayson could comprehend his mistake. "Deputy Chief Grayson," she began, her voice cutting through the frozen tableau with surgical precision. "Did you just lay your hand on me in this courtroom?" Her words carried the weight of both personal authority and institutional power, each syllable landing like a hammer strike. Grayson's initial confusion morphed into defensive posturing, his body language shifting from shock to attempted dominance. "I didn't know who you were," he sputtered, though his eyes betrayed the lie. "You weren't in your robe, you just—" Evelyn cut him off with a raised hand, the gesture silencing him more effectively than any gavel strike. "Would you have struck me if I were wearing my judicial robes?" she pressed, her voice maintaining its steady rhythm. "If I were a white male judge? If I were anyone else who fit your narrow definition of authority?" The room seemed to shrink around Grayson, as comprehension dawned across the faces of witnesses. Cell phones emerged, recording devices activated, and the press pool that had gathered for another case began to stir with excitement. Evelyn watched Grayson's facade crumble, his attempts at justification falling apart under the weight of undeniable evidence. "Your assault was captured on multiple cameras," she stated, gesturing to the surveillance equipment mounted in the corners of the room. "Your words were heard by half a dozen credible witnesses. Your career of unchecked aggression has finally caught up with you." As she ascended to the bench, her movements deliberate and authoritative, Evelyn felt the shift in the room's energy. This wasn't just about one officer's lapse in judgment anymore. It was about exposing the systemic rot that had allowed men like Grayson to operate with impunity for decades. She took her seat, the sound of the gavel striking wood punctuating her declaration. "Deputy Chief Malcolm Grayson, you are hereby placed under formal judicial investigation for criminal assault on a sitting judge. Officer Mills, please detain him pending further proceedings." Grayson's protest died in his throat as Officer Mills stepped forward, the younger officer's expression grim but professional. The deputy chief's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, his usual arsenal of excuses rendered useless by the sheer weight of witnessed truth. Evelyn maintained her composure, her voice steady as she outlined the charges and initiated the documentation process. The click of keyboards and the whisper of pen on paper filled the room, each sound marking another nail in the coffin of Grayson's previously untouchable career. For the first time in his professional life, he truly understood what it meant to be held accountable. The minutes following Grayson's detention transformed the courtroom into a hive of controlled chaos, as Evelyn marshaled her resources with military precision. "Carter," she called to her longtime bailiff, "secure all surveillance footage immediately. Notify Internal Affairs and request their presence here within the hour. Her assistant clerk, Maria, was already drafting the official incident report, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she documented every detail. Officer Mills maintained a firm but respectful stance near Grayson, who sat rigid in his chair, his face flushed with alternating waves of anger and fear. Evelyn's voice carried across the room, each word precise and deliberate. Maria, please pull every complaint filed against Deputy Chief Grayson in the last decade. Cross-reference them with similar allegations against officers under his command. She turned to Carter, who stood ready with his notepad. Contact our IT department. I want a complete audit trail of every case Grayson has testified in or led investigations for since his promotion to Deputy Chief. The bailiff nodded, already moving toward the phone. As she worked through her mental checklist, Evelyn's gaze occasionally landed on Grayson, watching as his carefully constructed world unraveled before him. His eyes darted between the growing stack of paperwork, the flashing lights of recording devices, and the increasingly crowded gallery. Journalists who had arrived for other proceedings now jostled for position, their cameras capturing every nuance of the unfolding drama. Evelyn maintained her focus, directing her team with quiet authority. Prepare a statement for the press, she instructed Maria. Emphasize that this is not about personal grievances, but about maintaining the integrity of our judicial system. The efficiency of her response served as a stark contrast to Grayson's escalating panic. Where he had once commanded respect through intimidation, he now found himself isolated, his former allies visibly distancing themselves. Officers who had shared coffee breaks with him now avoided eye contact, while prosecutors who had gladly accepted his questionable testimonies suddenly remembered urgent appointments elsewhere. Evelyn watched this transformation with a mixture of satisfaction and sadness, knowing that true accountability required dismantling more than just one bad actor. With the immediate crisis contained, Evelyn retreated to her chambers, her mind racing through the broader implications of what had just transpired. She removed her blazer with deliberate movements, hanging it carefully on the rack by the door, before turning to face her reflection in the mirror. The red mark on her cheek had faded to a faint line, but its significance burned brighter than ever. Her fingers traced the spot where Grayson's hand had connected, each touch reigniting memories of countless others who had borne similar marks, victims who had never received this moment of validation. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts, and Carter entered, his usually stoic expression showing rare concern. "They've taken him to Holding Room B," he reported, closing the door softly behind him. "Internal Affairs is sending 2 agents within 20 minutes. Evelyn nodded, already mentally preparing her strategy. "And word is spreading fast," Carter continued. "Grayson's union rep has already made contact. They're trying to contain this before it escalates." Evelyn's lips curved into a bitter smile. "Too late," she murmured. "This isn't just about one officer's misconduct anymore. We've been handed the opportunity to address decades of systemic abuse." She moved to her desk, pulling out a yellow legal pad and beginning to methodically list action items. Incident details, witness statements, camera angles. Each category represented another piece of the puzzle she intended to solve. "Get me every case Grayson touched in the last 10 years, she instructed Carter. "Flag anything involving excessive force claims, missing evidence, or suspicious plea deals." As she wrote, her mind raced through the potential fallout. This wasn't merely about punishing one man. It was about exposing an entire network of complicity that had enabled his behavior. The gravity of the situation settled over her like a heavy cloak. Every decision she made from this point forward would either reinforce or dismantle the protective barriers that had shielded men like Grayson for generations. She paused her writing, staring at the red mark in the mirror once more. This moment wasn't just about justice delayed. It was about justice denied to countless others who had never had a voice powerful enough to demand accountability. The weight of their stories pressed upon her shoulders, transforming personal vindication into a crusade for systematic change. The arrival of Internal Affairs agents Martinez and Chen marked a critical juncture in the investigation, their expressions suggesting they understood the magnitude of what they were walking into. Agent Martinez, a veteran investigator known for her relentless pursuit of truth, wasted no time laying out their findings. "Judge Harper," she began, opening a thick file marked Grayson, M. "We've been monitoring his activities for years, but until now we've lacked concrete evidence to act." She slid a series of documents across the table, each representing a dismissed complaint or mysteriously vanished body cam footage. Agent Chen, younger but equally determined, revealed a disturbing pattern. 3 separate incidents in the past 5 years involved assault allegations against Grayson, he explained. Each time the cases were closed due to lack of evidence, despite multiple witnesses and medical reports. Evelyn's eyes narrowed as she reviewed the documentation, her trained legal mind connecting dots that had been deliberately obscured. "And who handled these closures?" she asked, already suspecting the answer. "The same ADA," Martinez confirmed. "Victor Langston. He's been lead prosecutor on nearly 80% of Grayson's cases." Evelyn's pulse quickened as she recognized the name. Langston had been a fixture in her courtroom for years, always too eager to accept police testimony at face value. The agents exchanged a glance before Chen produced a thumb drive. "There's more," he said, inserting it into his tablet. "An anonymous tip from 2018 regarding Grayson's involvement in a violent arrest of a 16-year-old boy. The original body cam footage showed severe misconduct, but the version submitted for review conveniently cut out the most damning moments." Evelyn's hands trembled slightly as she scrolled through the corrupted video files and accompanying documentation. Each frame told a story of systematic cover-up, of power protected rather than checked. "Who verified these edited files?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "Detective James Whitmore," Martinez replied. "Grayson's former training officer and current captain of Internal Affairs." The revelation hit like a thunderclap. The very department charged with oversight had been actively participating in the obstruction of justice. As the agents presented their findings, Evelyn's mind raced through the implications. This wasn't merely a rogue officer gone unchecked. It was an entire network of complicity stretching from street-level enforcement through prosecutorial offices and into oversight agencies. Every layer of supposed accountability had been compromised, each participant in the conspiracy ensuring the next could continue operating without fear of repercussion. The scale of the corruption was staggering, and yet Evelyn realized this was likely just the tip of the iceberg. Her voice carried new determination as she addressed the agents. "I want everything," she declared. "Every case Grayson touched, every complaint buried, every prosecutor who looked the other way. And I want it on my desk by sunrise." Martinez and Chen exchanged a look of cautious optimism. They had encountered resistance before from judges unwilling to rock the boat, but Evelyn's resolve was unmistakable. "Consider it done," Martinez affirmed, already making notes for their expanded investigation. The gravity of the situation settled over the room like a storm cloud. What had begun as a single incident of assault had uncovered a vast network of institutional rot, each strand leading to more corruption than they had initially suspected. Evelyn stared at the growing pile of evidence, understanding that true justice would require dismantling an entire system of mutual protection that had operated unchecked for decades. The road ahead would be long and fraught with resistance, but the alternative, allowing this web of complicity to persist, was unthinkable. By dawn's first light, Evelyn's chambers had transformed into a war room of accountability. The overnight investigation had yielded a mountain of evidence that painted a chilling picture of systematic corruption. 19 separate complaints against Grayson, Carter reported, his voice tight with controlled anger. 12 involving officers under his direct supervision. 4 different prosecutors refused to pursue charges despite overwhelming evidence. 2 body cam videos disappeared during internal review, and both coincidentally involved young black defendants. Agent Martinez added to the litany of revelations. We found a pattern of financial transactions, linking the police benevolent fund to legal defense funds used exclusively for problematic officers. Over $50,000 funneled through shell companies in the last 3 years alone. Chen held up a document bearing Victor Langston's signature. This memo authorized the destruction of evidence in the 2018 juvenile case. It was co-signed by Captain Whitmore and countersigned by Deputy Chief Grayson himself. Evelyn's mind raced as she connected the dots between the evidence. "Get me every case where Grayson testified in the last decade," she ordered. "Cross-reference them with plea deals, negotiated by Langston. Pull the sentencing records. I want to see how many young black accepted deals rather than face trial against Grayson's testimony." The scope of the conspiracy was staggering, reaching into the highest levels of both law enforcement and prosecution. Phone records revealed regular communication between Grayson, Langston, and several city council members, while financial audits exposed a complex web of kickbacks and favors. The depth of the corruption manifested in chilling patterns. Cases against minority defendants showed consistent discrepancies. Charges upgraded without cause, bail amounts disproportionately high, and sentences significantly longer than comparable cases involving white defendants. Surveillance footage from precincts showed repeated instances of excessive force going unreported, while internal review boards consistently found officers within policy, despite clear evidence to the contrary. Most disturbingly, a pattern emerged of civil rights complaints being systematically buried or redirected to sympathetic judges who would dismiss them without consideration. As the sun rose over Newbridge, painting the courthouse windows with golden light, Evelyn understood the true nature of what she was facing. This wasn't merely about punishing individual wrongdoing. It was about dismantling an entire ecosystem of injustice that had evolved sophisticated mechanisms for self-preservation. The evidence spread across her conference table told a story of institutional racism perfected through bureaucracy, of power protected through intricate networks of mutual benefit, and of justice denied through carefully orchestrated obfuscation. Every document, every recorded conversation, every financial transaction represented another brick in the wall of systemic oppression that had stood unchallenged for generations. The telephone's shrill ring shattered the tense atmosphere of Evelyn's chambers. Chief Patterson's voice came through the receiver, calm but strained. "Judge Harper, I assume you've seen the footage by now." His words carried the practiced neutrality of someone attempting to maintain control of an unraveling situation. Evelyn leaned back in her chair, her voice steady. "Indeed I have, Chief. What did you hope to accomplish with this call?" Patterson hesitated, the silence speaking volumes about the precarious position he found himself in. "Look, Evelyn. May I call you Evelyn? You need to understand the complexity of what you're dealing with here. This isn't just about one officer losing his temper." His tone shifted, becoming more urgent. "You're pulling on threads that could unravel the entire department." "I'm aware of that," Evelyn responded, her voice sharpening. "That's precisely the point. Your department has been unraveling for years through unchecked abuse of power. I'm simply making it visible." Patterson's sigh crackled through the line. "You think I don't want accountability? You think I haven't tried to clean house?" His voice dropped. "But there are forces at play here that go beyond your courtroom. Beyond even my authority." Evelyn's fingers tightened around the receiver. "Then perhaps it's time those forces were brought into the light. Your attempts at internal reform have failed because they were designed to fail. Every time you've tried to discipline officers like Grayson, the union steps in, the mayor intervenes, or suddenly the evidence disappears. This pattern of interference is exactly why federal oversight is necessary." The chief's response came quickly, his professional mask slipping. "Are you threatening to bring in federal investigators?" Evelyn's reply was measured but firm. "I'm stating a fact. When local systems fail to protect citizens, higher authorities must intervene. Unless you can demonstrate that your department is capable of genuine reform, outside intervention becomes inevitable." Patterson's voice hardened. "You're playing a dangerous game, Judge. People in positions of power don't appreciate having their foundations shaken." Evelyn allowed herself a small, bitter smile. "Then perhaps they should have considered that before building their houses on sand." The line went dead, leaving Evelyn staring at the receiver. She understood the gauntlet had been thrown. The question now was whether the chief would choose to fight alongside her or against her in the coming storm. The confrontation between Evelyn and Ada Victor Langston unfolded with the intensity of a high-stakes chess match, each move calculated and loaded with consequence. As Langston stood beside Elliot Monroe, the ethics board representative sent to assess her recusal request, Evelyn recognized the careful choreography of damage control. "Judge Harper," Langston began, his practiced smile failing to mask the tension in his eyes, "we're here to ensure proper procedure is followed regarding your involvement in the Grayson matter." Evelyn cut through his diplomatic preamble with surgical precision. "Let's dispense with the pretense, Mr. Langston. Your office filed this recusal motion not out of concern for impartiality, but to protect your own involvement in covering up Grayson's misconduct." She turned to address the growing audience of reporters and court personnel. "I am stepping down from presiding over the Grayson arraignment, not because I'm compromised, but because I refuse to let this case be quietly swept away." Langston's face paled as Evelyn presented her meticulously organized evidence. The transcript of the assault, time-stamped surveillance footage, and most damning of all, his own signatures on dismissed complaints against Grayson. "Each of these cases," she continued, her voice resonating through the courtroom, "involved documented excessive force against minority defendants. Each resulted in plea deals negotiated by your office, often without proper legal representation for the accused." The room erupted as Evelyn revealed financial records showing payments from police benevolent funds to legal defense accounts used specifically for problematic officers. "These aren't isolated incidents," she declared. "They're part of a pattern of collusion between your office and law enforcement that has systematically denied justice to our community." Langston attempted to interrupt, but Evelyn's momentum was unstoppable. "Furthermore, I'm requesting immediate federal oversight into every case where Grayson testified or participated in arrests over the past decade." The press pack leaned forward as Evelyn dropped her final bombshell. "Mr. Langston, would you care to explain why you authorized the destruction of evidence in the 2018 juvenile case where Grayson hospitalized a 16-year-old boy?" The ADA's mouth opened and closed, his carefully constructed defenses crumbling under the weight of irrefutable evidence. Elliot Monroe from the ethics board shifted uncomfortably, clearly recognizing the depth of the corruption now exposed. "This isn't about one officer's misconduct," Evelyn concluded, her voice ringing with authority. "It's about dismantling a system that has protected abusers of power while victimizing those who trusted us to uphold justice. If we cannot confront this reality, we have no right to call ourselves a functioning democracy." The room buzzed with the realization that what had begun as a single incident of assault had evolved into a full-scale exposure of institutional corruption. Langston's career hung precariously, his attempts at damage control utterly ineffective against the tide of truth Evelyn had unleashed. The revelation of Victor Langston's complicity triggered a cascade of disclosures that would reshape Newbridge's justice system. As Evelyn methodically exposed each layer of corruption, the foundation of institutional malpractice began to crumble. Financial audits revealed a sophisticated network of money laundering through charitable organizations and legal defense funds, with contributions often originating from police union accounts. These funds had been strategically deployed to bury misconduct allegations, influence political campaigns, and manipulate public opinion through media outlets owned by shadowy holding companies. Personnel records painted a devastating picture of systematic discrimination. Minority officers faced disproportionate disciplinary actions for minor infractions, while their white counterparts received promotions despite documented misconduct. Training programs had been intentionally designed to reinforce racial biases, with psychological evaluations showing consistent patterns of dehumanization toward Black and brown communities. The data revealed that officers who expressed concerns about discriminatory practices were routinely transferred to less desirable assignments or pressured into resigning. Perhaps most damning was the discovery of a secret database maintained by Internal Affairs, cataloging every complaint filed against officers, regardless of outcome. This parallel system had documented thousands of allegations of excessive force, racial profiling, and sexual misconduct, each meticulously cross-referenced with the complainant's race, socioeconomic status, and political connections. The pattern was unmistakable. Cases involving influential white complainants received priority treatment, while those from marginalized communities were systematically deprioritized or deleted entirely. As the investigation expanded, it became clear that Grayson and Langston were merely visible manifestations of a much deeper rot. City Council meeting transcripts revealed coordinated efforts to suppress independent oversight, with officials trading favors and campaign contributions to maintain the status quo. Evidence emerged of regular meetings between police leadership, prosecutors, and municipal officials at exclusive country clubs, where policies were shaped far from public scrutiny. These gatherings had birthed initiatives that appeared neutral on the surface: increased funding for community policing, diversity training programs, but were actually designed to create the illusion of reform while preserving existing power structures. The scope of the conspiracy extended into the judiciary itself. Former judges, now retired or serving in administrative capacities, had participated in unofficial tribunals where sensitive cases were steered toward sympathetic benches. Younger judges who showed independence were subtly marginalized through assignment to less impactful dockets or denied opportunities for advancement. The system had evolved sophisticated mechanisms for self-preservation, each component reinforcing the others in a perfect machine of institutional racism and abuse of power. The pressure mounted relentlessly as Evelyn prepared to deliver her crucial address. Whispers of threats reached her through various channels: a suspicious vehicle parked near her home, a cryptic message left on her sister's voicemail, and most chillingly, a photograph of her niece arriving at school delivered to her chambers. Yet she remained resolute, understanding that these attempts at intimidation only underscored the importance of her mission. Standing before the assembled press corps and concerned citizens, she drew a deep breath, feeling the weight of history pressing against her shoulders. "Fellow citizens of Newbridge," she began, her voice steady despite the swirling tension, "what we face today is not merely a question of individual misconduct or isolated incidents of abuse. We stand at a crossroads where we must decide whether our justice system exists to serve all people equally, or whether it will continue to function as a tool of oppression for certain communities." Her gaze swept across the room, meeting the eyes of reporters, activists, and ordinary citizens who had gathered to witness this moment of reckoning. For decades, we've allowed a system to persist that protects its own at the expense of truth and fairness. We've watched as officers who swore to uphold the law have instead used their badges as weapons of intimidation. We've observed prosecutors who should have sought justice instead manipulate the system to protect their colleagues in blue. And we've seen judges, myself included, sometimes turn a blind eye to these transgressions in the name of maintaining order. Her voice grew stronger, more impassioned. But today, we say enough. The room fell silent as she unveiled the full scope of her findings. What began as an investigation into a single incident of assault has uncovered a web of corruption that reaches into every level of our justice system. From falsified evidence to financial manipulation, from systematic discrimination in promotions to organized suppression of legitimate complaints. The depth of this betrayal of public trust is staggering. She held up a thick binder containing the compiled evidence. This documentation represents not just crimes committed against individuals, but against the very concept of equal justice under law. Turning directly toward the cluster of reporters, she emphasized the historical significance of the moment. We have an opportunity to create real, lasting change, to implement independent oversight that cannot be compromised, to establish transparent procedures for handling misconduct allegations, to rebuild trust between law enforcement and the communities they serve through genuine accountability rather than performative gestures. Her voice softened but gained intensity. But this change requires courage. From our elected officials, from our community leaders, from every citizen who values justice more than convenience. The speech concluded with a personal commitment that silenced the room. I have dedicated my life to the law, believing in its power to protect and uplift. Today, I dedicate myself anew to ensuring that our justice system serves all people equally, regardless of race, wealth, or social standing. If this means sacrificing my position, my comfort, or even my safety, then so be it. Because true justice demands nothing less than everything we have to give. As Evelyn returned to her chambers after the press conference, her phone vibrated with an encrypted message from an unknown number. The text was brief but chilling. Stay in your lane, or your family pays the price. Rather than succumbing to fear, Evelyn's resolve hardened. She immediately activated the comprehensive security measures she had secretly arranged through federal contacts. Her family's homes were discreetly monitored, her loved ones accompanied by trusted protection teams, and her communications routed through secure channels. Grayson's handlers, meanwhile, had escalated their tactics, moving him through a series of safe houses while providing instructions through burner phones. Their messages carried increasing desperation. Make her understand she's playing with fire. Remind her family what happens to those who challenge the system. The surveillance photos they sent him of Evelyn's relatives proved their capability to strike anywhere, anytime. Yet Grayson's confidence wavered as he noticed inconsistencies in their promises of protection. The luxurious accommodations depicted in earlier plans had devolved into dingy motel rooms, and the promised legal team had dwindled to a single disinterested public defender. Evelyn's counter-strategy unfolded with meticulous precision. Through her network of allies in the federal investigation team, she traced each communication back to its source, gradually mapping the infrastructure of corruption that had protected Grayson for years. Every threat, every attempt at intimidation only provided more evidence to support her case for systematic reform. She worked tirelessly with her team to compile dossiers on each conspirator, documenting their roles in maintaining the corrupt system. Assistant prosecutors who had rubber-stamped dubious cases, internal affairs officers who had ignored clear evidence of misconduct, and municipal officials who had facilitated cover-ups all found their names added to the growing list of targets for investigation. The power dynamic shifted dramatically as the federal task force, armed with Evelyn's evidence and the mounting pressure from national media coverage, began executing search warrants and issuing subpoenas. Police captains who had once swaggered through precincts now arrived at work, wondering if today would be their last. Prosecutors who had built careers on conviction rates suddenly faced questions about how those convictions had been obtained. The old boys club that had operated with impunity for generations found itself under unprecedented scrutiny, with each member realizing that their traditional protections were evaporating. Grayson's isolation became complete when his handlers ceased communication altogether, leaving him trapped in a nondescript apartment with dwindling resources and mounting paranoia. Meanwhile, Evelyn's position strengthened daily as more whistleblowers came forward, encouraged by her unwavering stance and the tangible progress being made. The once unassailable network of complicity now resembled a house of cards, each removal of a key player causing the entire structure to tremble. As federal investigators worked through their expanding list of targets, Evelyn maintained her vigil, knowing that true victory would come not from individual prosecutions, but from the complete dismantling of the system that had enabled such widespread abuse of power. The culmination of Evelyn's crusade arrived on a crisp autumn morning. The federal courthouse packed to capacity as the trial against Deputy Chief Malcolm Grayson commenced. U.S. Marshals formed a protective perimeter around the building, their presence a testament to both the significance of the proceedings and the ongoing threats against those seeking justice. Inside, the atmosphere crackled with anticipation as Evelyn took her place in the witness box, her presence commanding the attention of everyone present. The prosecutor's questions flowed steadily, each answer she provided adding another brick to the wall of accountability being constructed around Grayson and his co-conspirators. "Judge Harper," the prosecutor began, "could you describe for the court what occurred on that pivotal morning?" Evelyn's voice rang clear and steady through the packed courtroom. "I was struck by a man who believed, based on his position and the color of my skin, that he could act with impunity." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. "In that moment I realized that the system I had devoted my life to serving had failed not just me, but countless others who had never had the opportunity to speak truth to such raw power." The defense attorney's cross-examination proved futile against Evelyn's unwavering testimony. "Surely, Your Honor, you must admit that your position influenced your perception of events," he ventured. Evelyn's response silenced the courtroom. "My position gave me the responsibility to act, not the privilege to ignore. If acknowledging systematic injustice is bias, then perhaps our courts need more of it." Her words drew approving murmurs from the gallery, quickly silenced by the judge's gavel. As the trial progressed, the scope of accountability expanded beyond Grayson. Prosecutor Victor Langston accepted a plea deal that required full cooperation with investigators. Captain James Whitmore, once untouchable in his internal affairs role, found himself facing multiple felony charges. The investigation's tendrils reached into City Hall, where 3 council members resigned amid corruption allegations. Most significantly, the federal task force secured indictments against 8 senior police officials and 5 prosecutors, marking the largest coordinated action against institutional corruption in Newbridge's history. The verdict delivered against Grayson, guilty on all counts, served as both climax and catalyst. Within hours, the Department of Justice announced a comprehensive reform initiative for Newbridge's police department, including federal oversight, independent review boards with real power, and mandatory cultural competency training. The state legislature expedited passage of Evelyn's proposed accountability measures, creating civilian oversight committees with subpoena power and establishing an independent office to investigate police misconduct. Yet Evelyn understood that true change required more than punitive measures. She spearheaded the creation of a judicial mentoring program, pairing experienced judges with young lawyers from underrepresented communities. Working with academic institutions, she established fellowships focused on studying and implementing equitable justice practices. Most importantly, she helped craft legislation requiring regular audits of police-community relations, with metrics tied directly to departmental funding. As the reforms took root, Newbridge began to transform. Community policing initiatives flourished, led by officers who had previously been marginalized within the department. Independent review boards successfully mediated disputes between citizens and law enforcement, building bridges where walls had stood for generations. The city's youth saw new possibilities in law enforcement careers that prioritized service over power, while seasoned officers adapted to a culture that valued transparency and accountability. The ripple effect extended far beyond Newbridge's borders. Other cities facing similar challenges looked to Evelyn's blueprint for reform, adapting its principles to their unique circumstances. National organizations advocating for police accountability incorporated elements of Newbridge's success into their platforms, creating a domino effect of positive change. The case that had begun with a single slap in a courtroom had evolved into a nationwide movement for justice system reform, proving that when courage meets opportunity, even the most entrenched systems of power can be challenged and changed. Standing before the State Judiciary Review Board, Evelyn Harper prepared to make her final, most significant decision. The flashes of cameras and the hum of reporters' voices faded into background noise as she focused on the moment's gravity. After careful consideration, she began, her voice steady despite the emotional weight of her words. "I am submitting my resignation from the bench." Gasps rippled through the room, but she pressed on. "I believe in the law's power to protect, to punish, and to heal. However, I also recognize that true transformation requires fresh perspectives and new leadership." She paused, surveying the board members whose expressions ranged from shock to understanding. "I've lit a fire that will illuminate the path forward, but it is not my place to bask in its glow. The changes we've implemented, independent oversight bodies, community review panels, transparent disciplinary processes, these require guardians who can nurture their growth without the baggage of past battles." Her gaze softened as she addressed the youngest board member, a newly appointed judge from the community she had fought hardest to protect. "Make sure the next person who wears this robe doesn't have to fight the way I did just to be heard." The board president rose to speak, but Evelyn raised her hand gently. "Please, let me finish." She turned to face the gallery, where faces of those she had fought for reflected both gratitude and concern. "To the young people watching, especially those who look like me, remember this. Power respects nothing so much as the courage to challenge it. The system isn't broken. It was built this way. But it can be rebuilt better, stronger, fairer. Don't wait for permission to demand change, and don't accept compromise when justice requires conviction." As she gathered her papers, Evelyn allowed herself a moment of reflection. The journey from that fateful morning in her courtroom had transformed not just the justice system, but her understanding of what true leadership demanded. She had learned that sometimes the most powerful act of authority was knowing when to step aside, to make room for those who could carry the torch further and brighter than she ever could. With a final nod to the board, she turned and walked from the room, her footsteps echoing through the corridors she had helped reshape forever. 2 months later, Evelyn found sanctuary in the embrace of family at her childhood home in Oakwood Heights. The neighborhood children played freely in the streets, their laughter carrying on the autumn breeze, a sound that once would have been muted by fear of overzealous policing. Her niece bounded up the porch steps, backpack swinging, and launched into an enthusiastic hug that spoke of freedom from constant protection details. "Auntie Evelyn," she chirped, "the news said you're like a superhero for justice." Evelyn chuckled, smoothing the girl's hair. "Not a superhero, sweetheart. Just someone who remembered what justice is supposed to look like." Together they watched the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple that seemed somehow brighter than before. The city beyond still bore scars, but they were healing wounds rather than festering sores. News alerts on her phone detailed continuing reforms, successful prosecutions of previously untouchable officials, and most hearteningly, stories of young people pursuing careers in law enforcement and justice reform. The community centers she had helped establish now thrived with programs bridging the gap between police and residents. Former adversaries worked side by side, building relationships that would prevent future abuses of power. As twilight settled over Oakwood Heights, Evelyn felt the profound